but unfortunately, he's not got a lot of time because, as I said, he's in Hong Kong. So we're going to have all his pearls of wisdom in the first 10 minutes. Go, George.
Okay. Yeah, it was just we were talking about what we should be covering at the moment, and I thought what would be useful is just to share with you what Brent O'Halloran, who's a colleague of Jack. I've just seen Jack come on before, a former colleague of Jack's. But Brent O'Halloran used to be, for anybody that doesn't know him, he was the head of asset management for Hyde, the housing association. And I had a very interesting chat with him a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying really that when he was head of asset management at Hyde, he'd got information on some pretty detailed information on certain aspects of the building across the whole of the estate. So, for example, if he's got several hundred buildings, he would know how much what the compliance with fire doors was, for example, or certain things across the whole of the state. So he'd know it's 99%. It would, that was his dashboard. He said, but I knew very little about everything in one building. Yeah, and what he was saying was that as an organisation, typically asset management, and Richard Bacon can probably confirm this to an extent, but when you're looking after a portfolio, it's spread quite thin, as it were, the level of detail that you've got. And what he was saying was that the building safety manager, the role that, for example, Bex is doing, is the one person in the organisation in many cases who knows a lot about, or everything, ideally, about an individual building. And that's a bit counterintuitive as far as the organisation is concerned. And I hadn't understood that. And what he was saying was that he's now trained up, I think something like, I think he said about 230 building safety managers. And it's a very interesting, different perspective. So the reason I was mentioning that is that what we've been doing, a lot of you have had some exposure to what we're doing in BIM asset management, which is, if you like, the sister organisation of BIM4Housing. But we're drilling into a lot more detail from an operations point of view. And the way in which we're doing that within BIM asset management is, rather than having the operations group and the design group and the manufacturing group and the development group, what we're actually done, we've broken it down functionally into the things that are needed for digital records. So things like interoperability and what should a digital record contain, and also how should we identify, for example, fire critical assets. And what I'd like to just pose here, just as as maybe a potential topic for what we cover today, is what is it that the operations team needs from development to enable those digital records to be collected properly, and as importantly, what do you produce? What is it that you're producing that is then going to help the next person in the chain achieve what they need to do? And then obviously, how do we then keep it all up to date? So I know these are things that we talked about many times over the period, but I just thought it was a worthwhile thing, because I'd not realised, you think the head of asset management of a major portfolio would actually know the detail, but he says it's just from an organisational point of view, that's not what they're measured on. They're actually measured on much higher levels. So that, I'm going to shut up now, and I'll leave it to Bex and Dave to run things.
Fab, thanks, George. Yeah, I guess then leading on from that, does anyone initially have any sort of comments on what George has said that we can sort of start this discussion with?
So I know I certainly find in my sort of role, I actually audit for our firm. So I tend to spend sort of like a week on different projects, a week on a project, type up a report the following week. And it is literally, if there is something that exists within whatever the type of building happens to be, I want to see records of it, which nature of sort of the age of our places, 15 to 20 years old. The bulk of the information and sort of O&M manuals and things that come across in the first place were on paper. There was never anything written into contracts to say that they were going to be digital and amendable or whatever. But so certainly from a maintenance records perspective, the findings that I get on site are remarkably different, even if it's the same company looking after it. Was on a load of schools 2 weeks ago. Absolutely cracking. There's and by no means an up-to-date modern electronic system, but a guy is running an Excel spreadsheet that has got literally every asset logged on it and a column saying whether a monthly, quarterly, biannual, whatever PPM is going to take place, what the PPM reference number is, what the SFG reference is for the tasks that are going to take place, actually keeping a record of everything. He's running a bolster system for maintaining or for tracking the maintenance on fire doors, fire stopping, etc., but has got that referenced back to his own Excel spreadsheet that he's keeping. Exactly the same company has also got a system that runs on their SharePoint, which is a dashboard that tells you how you're doing on 10 different subjects, which is good because you know if your lifts are being maintained, because it will tell you whether the last insurance inspection took place or not. It will tell you whether your last fire door took place if somebody's bothered to put the records on. But the quality and the demonstrability of, if you like, of what people have been carrying out on site varies literally even within the same company looking after different facilities. So I don't want to name company names particularly, but if we was going to say a company, an example one that you'd know, like Equans on some sites run dashboards, on other sites they haven't even got a guy running a spreadsheet. It's literally, all our records are in a folder on a wall. So trying to drag all of that into one system somewhere so that everybody can go and see it. So at some sites, some buildings that you go to, nice large team, priced it well, can afford to run a team so that they've got that sort of records being kept. Other places absolutely appalling, and it's in that pile of papers on the corner of somebody's desk. If you're lucky, it's been put in the folders on the wall. So,
and that is the issue, isn't it? Oh, sorry, who was?
Yeah, no, I was going to say you've got a task on your hand, Bex.
Me? No pressure.
Yeah, no,
but I mean that's kind of why we're opening up these discussions, really, isn't it? Alex.
Hi there. I hope my dog's not going to go mad in the background, and I hope the sound level's okay. I've just plugged in this microphone to be a bit more noise tolerant. Just as a general thought, I think it's a good idea for organisations to try and benchmark their level of maturity with building information knowledge, with the level of information they've got. By this point, I'd expect most organisations involved in BIM4Housing to have a good idea of what their information requirements are. Although I think as part of the that's a process to evolve what additional information we need. George picked up on a couple of really important points, I think, but what I would expect to be able to do quite easily would be able to run off a report showing what information you've got, and much more critically, what information you don't have against a defined framework. Bearing in mind that that might vary for the property types. With a BIM4Housing hat on, it's relatively straightforward because we're dealing with cookie cutter properties. Generally speaking, and don't quote me on this, I know this is being recorded and published, but generally speaking, houses are much the same. You need to know information at the most basic level about the components for replacement, and you need to know about the equipment that they have. More complex buildings, like blocks, flats within those blocks, you will need a high level of information for, which is what the new regulator's all about. And the building information, the building safety systems are all about as well, about defining those greater requirements, knowing about compartmentation, having a permit to work process, knowing the what, the where, the when, the how of work that's being applied. You need to be able to demonstrate that for building safety accreditation for the certification process. So I would expect it to be relatively simple to produce a report of what you don't have from most systems. Then understanding the level of detail you need for different property types is another level of maturity, if you like. So you need to be able to define what your general information requirements are, and then potentially break that down by different asset types. I think it's important to recognize that the information will vary, and that you'll probably have some site specific information. So just picking up on Richard's comments, I suspect you're coming more from say an FM facilities kind of world where there's and I'm working in that area myself a bit the last year as well, so I'm starting to realize that in that case every project, every 7 stages of RIBA is specific to a location. You go through this entire process for a specific site, a building. It might be a couple of buildings. It might be, hundreds of rooms or just a handful of rooms, and plant and equipment that's associated with that. But you go through that process for a location, and that's cookie cutter there, but then that's completely different to the project that's being built by different architects, different engineers, different primary contractors, different servicing engineers. It's totally different. Housing's more straightforward, not saying it's easier, by no means it's easier, it's a matter of scale, but the process should be something that's easier to wrap over. And if you're a housing association or a local authority, you've got complexities with the edge constraints, as I've said, the exotic buildings, high risk residential buildings, for whatever reason. There might be sheltered schemes, for example, and you might have some specific tenant types that you're serving, or residents or customers that you're serving. So there are some housing associations that specialize in care for elderly or care for military veterans, and therefore the systems you put in place are different. So just to summarize what I'm saying, I think it's interesting for organizations to think about what level of maturity they're on. Dare I say, if you're on this call today, then on a scale of 1 to 5, you're probably already at a 3, because you've probably got awareness, and you're probably doing something with information management. You have an idea of what you're collecting and how you need to manage and process that. You'll be a minimum of a level 3. To get to level 4, you've got to have and show that you can maintain that information going forward. So you can have all the information in the world in an enormous spreadsheet, but it's no good if that chap that you're talking about with that incredible spreadsheet, which sounds like a masterpiece to me, but if he retires next week or gets hit by a bus, God forbid, that information is going to go stale really quick. So it's about having...
Funny enough, and I'll give you, this is from his mouth, yeah? On auditing him last year and going, this is fantastic. And funny enough, I'm seeing him again next week because I happen to be up there. It's 28 different buildings, all on one site. It's all accommodation. It's all a big student accommodation place. The reason that the guy set it up so good is I'm retiring in 5 years' time, and I want 5 years sat doing next to nothing. So I've made this as simple as it can be for me to run. Anybody else coming in can do exactly the same set of simple that I do. And it is literally, the guy has gone, how do I make life easy for myself? And he's put questions out to all the different teams that look after things so that he gets the right information in at the end of each month. So it really is, that's what each company, everyone needs to do. If you're looking after a property, ask people the right questions that you want in at the end of each month, and at least you're 30 days ish from live information at any given point in time. So he really is at the bit of, if anything happens, I want to be able to do that before the curly wig. If I can do that before the curly wig, I know I'm all right. So he's asked the right set of questions, and that's all anybody needs to do. That's as mature as you need to get. Ask the right questions, make sure you get the A set of answers back. But if you can do it electronically, so everything lives in one place, even better still, because it doesn't matter what room I'm sat in, I could audit you from home.
It's a very good point, Richard. Oh, the other Richard.
Good morning. I just wanted to add, absolutely endorse everything that's been said about the information and the importance of information. One of my concerns from really is about the accuracy of the information and the number of organisations that accept original information that's produced through the design process as built records. That is of very little value really to asset management teams. What asset management teams is as built records, and that's why things like 360-degree photographs of plant rooms that are tagged are so important. And the other point I sort of wanted to make was we really need to get into the digitisation and access to information, because if you look at CDM health and safety files, they've come on such a long way, terribly long journey to get there. But now they are so much better because they're monitored as they're built through the construction process and that sort of thing. And then when they get handed over, they disappear into a black hole because it's not easy to access that information for many organisations. So people have to go looking for it. And it goes back to the relying on a person that's not been hit by a bus. And there needs to be something that is actually very easy to access. And I think the way to encourage that is either through legislation or contract specification. Put the requirements in your contract for as-built records. And the other one is getting boards, anybody responsible for governance, the powers that be, getting to understand the risk of not having that information easily accessible. And a perfect example is your preoccupation fire risk assessment. That will also sit with one person somewhere within an organisation, which is great up until a point. It's not great at all, actually. It's a terrible thing. So that's my 2 pence.
So funny enough, Richard, but what you're saying, we're finding now that one of the sort of big issues we're having, where lots of our contracts are coming back to handback. So we're going to be handing over to some local authority or other in the next 5-10 years. The inaccuracies that we've got in what was supposedly an as-built drawing that was nothing remotely like an as-built drawing. It was as designed. O&M manuals that are missing vast swathes of information about equipment that's been installed, where someone has had a look through 15-20 years ago and gone, oh yeah, that reflects what we've got on site. And all right, it names one type of fire alarm system, but the block, so I know the block where we got the 28 different blocks of student accommodation have actually got 3 different types of alarm system in, all the same manufacturer, and it was all as they were being built, and it was just that one they stopped making. So they've put type 2 in. They'd stopped making that by the time they finished the full construction of all of the site. But all of their O&Ms have actually got the middle panel in. So we've got people dragging in information, but you get 20 years down the line, and half hard to get all of this stuff together. And that's sort of, we've got CAD engineers out working, literally just going around going, let's get all of these drawings up to date now, because if we can get them up to date now, last little bit of life cycle that we do won't be too hard to reflect on drawings. But some places there's been a couple of sets of life cycle work take place.
Yeah, and here's something that I think should be a real encouragement for people as an example as to why this is important that everybody in this meeting is working towards, and that is asbestos. It's decades since we've been using asbestos in buildings, and could you name a client who knows where all the asbestos is in all their buildings? No, you couldn't. That is on its own is really a measure of how important this is and the people in this group. Absolutely.
I know us at Live West, we actually have a very, very good system for our asbestos. We've sort of got a portal which we give to our contractors, and it defines where the asbestos, and it's not quite to the level of sort of data standards, but it is a very useful tool. So I think clients are getting a bit more savvy, especially housing associations, because we need to know it for our own operatives as well. It's quite important.
No, I get that. The problem with the asbestos is, and is a good example you guys decide, is it was used from everything from window packers to lintels above fires to walls, whatever, ceiling finishers and all that sort of thing. It was seen as such a versatile material back in the day until people found out its dark secret. That there are people who have got great records like yourself, Bex, but it doesn't change the principle that you don't know where it all is. Be
careful, yeah.
And that's the lesson to take forward through this group, I think, because what about MDF? Is that a future carcinogenic product? Who knows? Simple fact is we don't, and that's why record keeping is so important. But equally, if not more important, is actually being able to access that and the legacy that you leave behind. We do a 3-stage risk assessment. I'm not aware of anybody else that does a 3-stage one. The risk as you're sort of developing something, how much you minimize that risk, because you don't always get rid of all the risk. But then is there a legacy risk? And an example for that for me is if you look at fire doors, and under the Building Safety Act, we've got the 11 metre rule thing, where it's a 1 hour fire door above whichever height's agreed at the minute. But if you're in a 4-story building, you only need a half-hour fire check door because you're below that height. So if you do a risk assessment, it says, yes, that meets the current thought process. But really, in principle, and we're all intelligent people, look beyond that. Any complex building should reflect what the high-rise buildings are. So the legacy risk is there could be a time, or there should be a time, more importantly, that you actually do the same thing for those customers than what you do in your high-rise. So I'm getting on my high horse. I apologise.
No, in all honesty, Richard, it's a question that we've asked where we've said, if we've got a company carrying out maintenance activities for us that at the moment have got a high risk building, which we have got contractors that are looking after high risk buildings, not for us right this minute, but we've got complex buildings that they look after. If they're looking after something to a standard in a high risk building, does that not effectively become the industry norm for them, yeah, or best practice? So that should be what they reflect everywhere. Because if they happen to have a problem elsewhere, it might not be a high risk building, but any judge worth his salt is going to ask, so if you are able to look after something to standard X, why don't you just do it everywhere? That means that the standard T that you've done in this other complex building, or whatever you want to call the slightly lower standard, actually isn't the best that you can do, because you've already proven to me that you can do better elsewhere. So it's going to come in. Well, we know anyway that it's going to get filtered down to more and more and more buildings. But yeah, future-proof things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's the best practice real thing, isn't it? It's Dame Judith Hackett's golden thread. And you know, we actually were speaking to her recently, and there was a comparison made, interestingly, with CDM. So CDM's now been in place since 2015, which we all know and we all love, and we've all got processes in. The Building Safety Act has only been in place since 2022, and you know how long CDM took to really embed itself. I think that we can, as long as we're doing the right thing to hit those requirements of the Building Safety Act, so that golden thread, we're all moving in the right direction, that information is available to the right person at the right time, and it's the right information. Those are the key things, and I think that's kind of what this group is. It's so it is a whole new thing. I say it's a whole new thing. It's not really new. BIM's been around for ages, but in terms of the building safety element of it, it's how do we get that holistic view of that building, because it all has to be specific and hit that golden thread that is so important in legislation, and it is in legislation.
Yeah, I suppose the question to that is, as a good asset management organisation, why does it have to be legislation? Why is it not good business practice? And part of that is cost, because we work on capital rather than value in too many areas. But the Dame Judith Hackett thing is a really good point, because when that journey started, her team wrote to all local authorities, housing associations, landlords, and said, how many high-rise buildings have you got? Majority of them didn't know. There are now over 18,000 registered. And that's ignoring the complex buildings that are multi-occupancy. So I suggest that there's 3 times as many sort of buildings because of complexity than what there are high-rise. And morally, we'd like to do it. Capital cost-wise, people don't see a need to do it unless they're forced to. And that's where the change needs to come in, sort of through this group. So
absolutely. I mean, the regulator themselves have said that they, in the next sort of, not right now because they have not got the capacity, but they will look to decrease the minimum height to 11 meters, if I'm from the last time I heard. So it is something that actually, if we do want to future proof, if we do want to do what you're saying, Richard, there's no reason to not start looking at it in preparation. And also, these are people, let's not forget why building safety exists. It's to keep people safe. And if we think people would be safer in these buildings while we work a particular way, then there's no reason why we shouldn't work towards that anyway. I mean, it's like I say, it's a moral thing.
Well, I delivered a £5 million sort of job, multi-occupancy and that sort of thing. Our general needs, to be fair, and I just gave an instruction to swap all half-hour fire check doors for 1 hour fire check doors. It was expensive, 80 quid a door. That was it. And I've put something in place on that building that is exceptional. And the 5 million was a wider scheme than that. It was 30 flats. So that's 2,400 quid. That's all I put on the price of that building to have simple 1 hour protection.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What I didn't do was tell anybody that was the powers that be until we'd done it, which is a terrible position to feel that you have to be in to actually make those very simple sort of improvements. So.
And something that was mentioned, I can't remember who mentioned it earlier, that there was concerns about actually what, in the terms of moving from handover from development to operational, you're given this, we've built this, but that's not actually true. So where does that lie? So because you can send stock condition surveyors out to get the data you want, like after it's built, but actually where's that link there? And has anyone got any open up that one for a discussion?
I'm going to throw in key stage inspections as a contractual norm, or should be a contractual norm. and it's something that we use for quality management. And if anything to do with fire safety and fire regulation is inspected by the developer, it's photographed, it becomes part of a quality report that's issued, and it's validated by a third party to do that. But it also runs through the sort of normal construction process, so that you know you've got your insulation, your cavity insulation in, because we've had properties offered without cavity wall insulation. In this day and age, how does somebody miss cavity wall insulation? Anyway, but it's a simple process. People do quality checks, they go on site, they do things like that. It can be on a sampling basis. It doesn't have to be every single one. But if something comes to light, then you just do deeper investigations into that area, particularly around fire safety and that sort of thing. So it's a very minor tweak to existing practices. In fact, it's probably not a tweak at all, actually. It's probably just recording the information and having it somewhere that people can access. That's the minor tweak.
Absolutely. And someone said it's about the reliant on one person as a single point of failure as well. That needs to not be a thing. Mark.
Yeah, hey guys. I don't think I've met many of you before, if any, but I've had lots of chats with George over the past sort of year. But we're safety case experts, right? And we come from the aviation industry, from military aviation. And we've come into this industry a couple of years ago. We got invited by Lewisham, and now we're helping 50 odd organisations do safety cases, etc. So just getting back to that discussion about acceptance of a building, and excuse my ignorance of not knowing your industry particularly well. Where we resolve this issue that you talk about in aviation, it truly is coming into the industry where aviation was 20, 30 years ago when I kind of first joined it, okay, is safety management systems. We're going into councils, XYZ, and where this is resolved is within a process called a safety management system. It's not a health and safety policy, it's a safety management system, and the developer should have a safety management system. So all the processes you're proposing using your vast experience as a team, okay, it's not about having experienced people, because like you said, people move on. It's having a robust safety management system as a building owner. It's Barratt Homes having a robust safety management system. And when a contractor starts a new development and goes through the gateway process, you as a future owner of a building understand how the two safety management systems interact. And that's defined in an artifact before design even starts. That's how aviation has resolved the issues you're talking about. And that's how we don't get aeroplanes. Stand by the Boeing 737 MAX. So that's a conversation over a beer. But all the issues you're talking about, honestly, are resolved by having robust SMSs. And that is by far the weakest area of the three key elements needed in the safety case by regulation. And that is how you mitigate loss of experience as well. But that's my 2 pence worth, as somebody said earlier on. But thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That's a really key point, actually, that safety management system and that resilience. Dave, you're on mute. You're on mute, Dave.
Yeah, sorry, I've realised I don't normally put myself on mute, but I'm babysitting my next door neighbour's dog at the moment. And I was in a meeting yesterday and they said, why do you keep typing all the way through? And it wasn't, it was his paws on the wooden floor. So I've muted my microphone, sorry about that. Yeah, going back to listening to what everyone has said, I mean, I think, everyone is sort of, in agreement on a lot of things. I think where organisations tend to have things slip through the gaps is taking ownership of that data and ownership of that documentation, because invariably we have, specific teams that deal with new developments. They're concentrating on, delivering a building. And then when it comes to the operational groups, so where people are looking at compliance, looking at stock condition, all of those sort of areas, the operational side, if you like, it's almost that developments sort of chuck it over the fence and say, there you go, there's all, this is what we've got, get on with it. And I think that probably it's an organisational failing, that there isn't that cohesiveness between the people delivering new buildings and the people then maintaining those buildings going forward. And I don't know how you fix that, because obviously it's unique to each individual organisation how they deal with that transition. But it does seem to me that preoccupation stage, that Gateway 3 stage, is an ideal opportunity for all of those teams that are involved to pile into that building and find out for themselves whether the information that they're receiving is accurate or not. And people don't tend to take advantage of that, and they tend to wait till after occupation, and then they're fighting getting access to flats and things like that because the tenants, are either not there or unwilling to let them in, and that causes issues. And I think maybe as part of that development handover process, because we process map everything as part of our safety management system in order to make sure that we're consistent in the way we deal with things. But overcoming that hurdle of getting the teams to all work together cohesively at that critical point is one of the major hurdles that we are struggling with, and perhaps other organisations are struggling with as well.
Absolutely. And Lucy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, it was related initially to the comment about aviation, and I assume that as Mark was talking about aviation, that's specifically around airplane design, isn't it, or rather than the construction at airports, because the construction at airports still has the same issue. They still have the same issues that everyone else does with seeking compliance and the process of getting there. But I'm picking up on Dave's point and about handovers and the process of getting to handovers. I think I'm experiencing at Mace certainly a kind of where no one's willing to slow down the process to get it right, and we're commercially still evaluating the cost of a building on the same methods and time scales that we did before. And actually, to do things correctly and diligently is going to take a longer process. I don't think the RBA process is particularly. It needs more work. It needs more depth in it. For example, stage 4 is still, confusing in some respects because architects will do stage 4, but then building services engineer will do part of it, and then the CDP element comes into it. Do main contractors really understand the responsibility of CDP? CDP shouldn't be no design intent whatsoever. There should be design intent from somebody else. And then I think also, I'm picking up Dave's, someone mentioned verification and third party. I think there's a lack of people in the industry that can provide that verification on if something's right. So I guess my general comment was one about aviation construction have its problems, but then secondly, I think that the process hasn't slowed down, and people are still trying to do it. And I don't see how culturally that's changed to get it right and get the detail right.
Yeah, funny enough, I think that this is one of the things that the gateway process is going to make people, if you like, make that time, because I'm aware of new builds that have gone for certification, pre-occupation, and something's been found wrong with it by the regulator, and that basically puts another 6 months on the timeline, before they can occupy the buildings. So they're losing money over that period because they didn't do everything in the initial submission. So I think maybe that change in attitude and that change in process will end up being sort of forced on people, rightly so, because of the fact that they just, the regulator isn't going to roll over and go, oh, well, they're missing a few bits, but that's all right. We'll give them a certificate anyway. Hearing from other people's experiences of, what happens, the turnaround, even, if you've got everything right, the turnaround with the regulator before that you can occupy the building is adding time to the life cycle, the development life cycle, anyway. And then the minute, once again, you've got an incomplete submission, you can end up, adding months to that timeline anyway. So it will force people to have an incentive to do things right first time, hopefully. I don't know if anyone else has already had experience of submitting stuff to the regulator for new builds.
Not new builds. I had one for a works in an existing HRB, and it was incredibly minor. It was basically replacing a non-fire resisting wall with a fire resisting wall, so not a lot of question. And it took about, what was it, 8 weeks plus a month, I think it was, because they asked for an extension. And that's where the industry is at the moment with that side of things. It's, they're just not, until April next year, they're not going to have the capacity to really respond in line with their the legal timeline. But it's complex. And I guess going back to the operations side of things, has anybody in the group sort of experienced submitting for a building assessment certificate yet, or anything like that? And I mean, I think that's one of those things that a lot of people are keen to know.
Yeah, so we've got about 60 of them with the regulation at the moment, 60.
Okay.
And we've probably had initial feedback on 20 of them, probably about 10 different clients.
And what sort of time scales are you experiencing, Mark?
Hey.
Sorry, I jumped in on that one.
That's all right. So it's taking a while, right? So the first submitted end of April, beginning of May is the first kind of tranche. And when you submit a report from our system, it has your evidence in there, and obviously a PDF report with live evidence in your security issues. So we limited the permissions on the evidence being live for 90 days. At about day 95, we didn't think the regulator would take 90 days to get to the report and looking at evidence. On about day 95, our clients got snotty emails from the regulator saying we can't access the evidence. Where is it? The link's dead. And we didn't think it'd take that long to get to it, if that helps. So the initial feedback from the early May submission clients got about 4 weeks ago. They don't know quite what they're asking for at the moment. The safety case is a summary, is a persuasive argument of why this building should have people living in safely. It's not about a review of all the evidence. Okay. I think the regulator still doesn't understand what a safety case is, and they're actually asking insanely to submit all the evidence, which for an average client's about 100 bits of data for each building, right? And so we're trying to work with them, and through the bigger clients, our bigger clients with 180 plus portfolios, to explain how our tech is just like the other stuff. It would help. Is helping them review the report and doesn't need all the evidence to be uploaded, which is working actually, because the first call we had was from a consultant who's working for the regulator saying that the BSR is like the Wild West at the moment. There's no consistency in there. There's no policy of understanding of how to review and what good looks like. So you've got a couple of people not willing to click on links, and then you've got a few other people who are willing to click on links. And we've educated them now that the link that in our system is a snapshot in time, because that link is the report, is that a piece of evidence at that time that report was generated. If it's updated subsequently in the safety case, it doesn't change it in the report. So what's the bottom line? The regulator still doesn't quite understand what a safety case looks like. They're taking a long time to get to reviewing safety case reports. And at the moment, they're going right of arc, rather than say, is this a persuasive argument? Is this organisation competent to look after this building? And are they trustworthy? Have they got the confidence? That's good enough. No, they're actually wanting to review, take in all the evidence and upload all 100+ documents, which is absolutely insane. So what I'm doing actually is I'm trying to connect Tim Galloway with the Military Aviation Authority regulators, so other regulators, to say this is how we do it and this is how we regulate it. This is proportionate regulation. That's not what they're doing at the moment. So we're trying our best. So if anybody on the call got some good contacts at the regulator, please let me know, or let Bex know who can get in contact with me, because we're working with them at the right level, but the more input we have, the better. Hope that helps.
That's really, really interesting, because that kind of, it's the spirit of the law isn't let's go through every piece of evidence, is it? It's are you keeping people safe in this? Is this building safe?
Correct.
And that's actually really interesting. So I guess, linking back to what BIM4Housing is all about, that evidence, if the regulator are being that, I'm not going to say picky because that's the wrong word, but it's the only word that's come into my head. If they're being quite focused on that, then how in operations can we manage that? Like, because that's huge. You can't.
Yeah, sorry, Bex.
No, carry on.
So what we're doing is we've just done an upgrade to our system to help them with that. So in our safety case summary, it has the evidence, right, that they can click on and look at. But now we've just done an output where we get in the annexes a bibliography of all 100 pieces of evidence indexed, which is a live A4 bit of paper, right, which they can click on any PDF, and it sends them to that time in space when the report was presented, when the report was written, if that makes sense.
Like MOT time.
Yeah.
It's basically you're just going, this day's MOT was fine. If the wheels have split the following day, you can't. Yeah,
that's what I'm thinking. Is more of a snapshot. That's what they want. And that's the thing, that the safety case report is a snapshot to prove that evidentially that you're conforming to what you should be. And like you said, I mean, the thing is, if they're taking 3 months before they even go to look at that evidence, particularly with, say, compliance and maintenance, you're going to get a snapshot from 3 months ago. That evidence doesn't necessarily prove that in the 3 months since you submitted that you're still carrying on that. I mean, admittedly, you can show that you've got processes in place, but if they actually want to look at the actual data to prove that things have been done right, that data is going to be held in an asset management system. It's not going to be held in your system, because that's where the live data resides to prove that that maintenance is being carried out. So I mean, that it's quite interesting that they're being so diligent, but at the same token relying on evidence that was submitted 3 months ago.
Yeah. I mean, yes, and I think also scary for organisations is that the regulator has an open purchase order at £144 an hour as well.
Yes.
So we had George was there actually. We had an event in when was it, last month, where we had 100 odd people, and we had somebody from the regulator, well, not contracted to the regulator, from Bureau Veritas, who's leading the structures side, Ruth Haynes. And she gave a very good presentation, and her team are taking around 20 to 30 hours just to review the structural elements of the report. So if you add 20 to 30 hours on a fire, 20 hours on the safety management system, you're getting up to 60 to sort of 80 hours, and you can do the maths at 144 quid. So they reckon anywhere between £5,000 to £20,000 per report to review. Every 5 years.
Yes.
So yeah, it's challenging. It's just trying to, I'll be honest with you, I don't agree with the community's thought that the regulator should be telling us how to do things, and they should be giving us more frameworks and templates. That's what we get told often. I've never worked. A regulator isn't meant to do that, and that's not the intent of a regulator. It is for us as a community to educate ourselves what safety is and what good looks like, and how we convince ourselves that this building is safe enough. Would we put our families in there, etc. And the regulator is never going to tell us. Sorry, Lucy, stop me talking. Lucy, go for it.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think my experience is there's still the behaviours are still, let's just get it across the line with what the building regulator are looking for, particularly outside high risk or anything to do with residential. And I think until potentially there are some levels of prosecutions in certain areas, that those behaviours might not change. And I think it has to be almost, it's a telling off, isn't it? Until that happens and you can reference that. I'm struggling with it all the time.
So
it's a real shame, but
sorry, Richard.
I was going to say, sadly, it's until people read their Barber report each week and something comes up that says somebody's been fined £1 million for whatever it happens, for some sort of contravention. Generally speaking, companies don't bother listening until they can put an amount of money against it. And Mark and the sort of work that Mark is doing, if that costs me $250,000 a year as opposed to that £1 million, perhaps Mark's a good investment, or Lucy, like the individual that's going to be doing that job's a good investment. Sadly, until people, and it's a shame it's how the world works, until people can quantify things in financial terms, they don't actually understand risk. And sadly, the bit that you should understand is one life got lost, and that people see that as the risk. It's never, that's the bit that sort of industry doesn't pick up. Industry picks up pounds and pence. So that's our battle, is getting people to recognise the power of the value of a person as opposed to the value of a pound.
Before Alex, sorry, Bex, I'm taking control. One thing I would say, despite having the regulations, and say we every organisation was compliant to the regulations, had a robust safety case, people will still die in HRBs. We will still have fires in HRBs, just like aeroplanes will crash and people will die. So complete safety doesn't mean people won't die. Don't get me wrong. But sorry, Alex.
Yeah, I wasn't going to follow up that on that particular point, but a thought that just occurred to me with my more strategic asset management hat on, just as a thought here, we're describing a situation where, in order to collect digital information models, I've heard customers, other people in these groups are reporting spending between £20,000 and £70,000 on a block to go in and do, surveys on the building to capture all the information in order so they know about the state of that building in terms of its structure, organisation and components that are being used to build it, the materials and so on and so forth. Then this additional £5,000 to £20,000 to get certified, or to get through the regulation process to get that certificate. And reading news headlines that the new government want to be building 300,000 homes a year at a level that we haven't done since the 1960s. Is it likely that we're going to see more investment in low-rise buildings? That we're going to, the limit is 18 metres or 7 stories to residential buildings within that. So is it possible that housing associations, local authorities and other builders are going to be looking at 17 metres for the height of their buildings? Because if you go to the 18th, if you go to that 7th story, you go to that 18th metre, you need to spend an extra £120,000 for nothing back. I say nothing back. Clearly, you've got a safer building, potentially through that process. But just food for thought on there. How do we go about getting more houses built to the required standards, at, volume and scale? Hundreds of thousands of properties built every year. With all these additional information requirements that we've got, is there a role for for modern technology in this? Are we doing things wrong? Because this sounds very spreadsheet based, very project based, very site based. Is there something that we can do as a group to try and improve things?
I think there's loads of things that could be modernised in the process of how you design, and go and implement those designs on site, etc. But I think the fundamentals, it'd be a crying shame if everyone went look for the loopholes rather than fix the incompetencies that are in design and construction, and that's it. Is people are so used to certain procurement methods, or for example, designers are so used to what they get paid for a certain level of design information. When it becomes actually people find holes in it, they reference, it was okay before, and actually all that Building Safety Act is actually asking for is that actually the process to be done correctly. But the problem is, I think you've got a whole generation, some of us included, that are used to not doing that and doing the minimum to get by, isn't it? And I think that the danger is obviously of the new government, and they're trying to show that they can deliver the solution to the housing crisis, is that some of this gets overlooked in the need to satisfy for politics rather than for the appropriate amount of detail. And I think in line with that, I think that there's the cultural issue with, there's a lot of people running construction that are either from a commercial background that don't understand the details and technical details of how to construct, are making the decisions in line with, there's a lot of, constructions have to entice a lot of people into it that would normally not get paid some of the salaries there are. Like, there's a lot of people in quite significant positions that aren't maybe competent to lead those type of businesses either, when we're talking about the technical complexities and stuff, that trying to deliver a project well, you need to technically understand it. And I think that's where the strength and depth is missing in construction. But these are eat the elephant problems, unfortunately. So I think you're right. I think politics will drive loopholes, won't it, until more issues happen.
I think also on the back of what you were saying, Lucy, as well, before we go to Chris, I saw an interesting post on LinkedIn the other day, and between the late year 2023 October and this year, there was 1,018 Gateway 2 applications, and only 146 were signed off by the regulators. So you've also got, it's not just the side of the construction side, but it's also the regulator side, and it's a tricky situation, really, isn't it? Chris, on to you.
Hi, sorry to join late. I'm coming more from the data side. Essentially, I was data modeler at L&Q previously, so I've looked at handover sheets and things. So the discussion earlier was you have different parts of an organisation needing different information at different times. So what I've not really seen organisations do is almost like segregate what they need things for. So obviously you've got building systems, but for so where you need to supply things for the regulator, so your firewalls, if you break down what types of component are we using, which might need to be regulated. So you could have a list of, say, 10 types of walls, what regulations would apply to those. But then potentially when you go back to your BIM model, you'll say, this is where this type of wall is. We can show that we've purchased this type of wall. These are the specifications which you needed to see for that type of wall. And we could potentially show you in a model where they're used. If there's any components which are different, so obviously when you're further down the track and you've actually got people in the building, then you'll have to start tracking if you need different replacements for types of things. But people need to sort of figure out who needs what and segregate what needs to be attached to those types, and then potentially show where those types are. Because again, it's not just getting new builds over the wall. If you've got to go and do building safety cases for other things, at some point you've got to know what you need to collect, potentially to have somewhere in it, so that when people do surveys and they come back to say, oh, we haven't found this in there, we haven't found this particular fire door, it's been replaced, that they've actually got a place to update that stuff. But it's almost thinking that up front, you know, for maintenance and repairs, which building systems have we got, which do we need to know are in warranty, and then you have those groups of things together, because then you can see what's being swapped in or out of the system and so forth. But if everyone's just doing it reactively, not planning what groups they need, so that if there's an impact that they can track it later on. Does that make sense? I don't know. I haven't got the practical experience, but I do look at the data, and again, it's with the legacy systems. You know, you don't have that flexibility, but then everyone's scared to touch anything because that system's as it was set up. But if you think of that up front, then you potentially have got that flexibility to say, this is a particular system, we know what's in it. If somebody finds something else in it at a later date, we can update what we've got, and it's always there. Don't know if that's confused everyone. That's my bit.
No, it's a very relevant point, because, you know, this is kind of what this group's all about, is that information management side, and it's something that I'm sure we all struggle with, you know, different types of information, different places, all of those things. There's no consistency. So I guess, you know, opening up the floor again, if anyone wants to sort of talk about that side of things, in relevance to the operational side of the buildings.
It should be mandatory, right, for every building that's new to have a fully, to a certain level BIM model that's usable, right? That's not necessarily being procured in every sense in every building that's being built, and that's part. But if legislation was to come in to support that you had to procure a certain level of BIM, and that was delivered throughout the life cycle from the trade contractors, not just the designers, I think then you could start having appropriate data for buildings going forward. And at the moment, it's not mandatory to do that, because it's just as built information, right?
Should be written in the construction contracts that's what's going to be delivered.
I mean, if you look back to the history of BIM, isn't it? So BIM was pioneer. You know, we wouldn't have, if it wasn't for government-led projects, BIM wouldn't be where it was today, because certainly the consultants weren't investing in BIM, and the contractors started to invest in it because they wanted to get on the government frameworks for schools and hospitals, and that's why BIM progressed, and that's why then architects, engineers started getting training. And it was a you couldn't work on these projects, and because residential sits in the private sector, that's not happening. The only way it can happen if it sits within a requirement, and that's what's needed. And then, you know, because at the moment, I mean, BIM's not contractual, 2D information is contractual. That will never change, I think, from a legal point of view. But obviously we all know that in this day and age, most people do cut from the BIM model. So therefore there's a source of data, but there should be a mandatory level of LOI and LOD that an operations team should receive at the end of the project. And that should be, that means upskilling the supply chain to provide modelling, which is still quite weak in the fit out side of things, so that is all the way through. And I think that's a game changer. And that's when you'll start seeing where the detail gaps are. And that does mean then, you know, maybe the regulator needs to be checking that as built more than what they're doing. Do you know, like online, is this data available, or part of this whole process?
I think organisations do. I think organisations still need to take responsibility to sort of figuring out how they want that model. It's no point saying a contractor's going to hand that over and you've got nowhere to put it. You know, 2 months into a building going live, doors will be fixed, something will be broken and replaced, and
yes,
it'll be exactly the same point that you're going to have to look at plans, or you're going to have to look at old BIM models. So I think if organisations could think of what they want essentially, and then drive towards saying you're going to replace that data, or you're going to replace that door. What type is it? Scan it. We know what type it is. We know what spec it is, and we know it got swapped for a different
I'm a bit of a
instance
cynic
of that
because
component.
I think that it needs to be, you need to bring in a consistency, otherwise people don't invest. So I kind of feel like you'll get that. If it's mandatory for the operations team to maintain a model when they do any alterations to a building that contains people that live in it, then you'll start getting consistency across that. But at the moment there's nothing mandatory, is there? And I think that's we won't get the drive. What I'm saying is, if you don't have the government, you had government and investment in BIM in the birth of BIM because they were doing it because of schools and investment in hospitals. If we don't get some sort of thing to support, some sort of legislation that you should procure a detailed BIM model both from your designers and your supply chain, and that should be maintained through the life of the building, then you won't get any change.
It's back to the asset management system a bit. I mean, you don't necessarily need them. I don't think you necessarily need a model. You just need to know which components you're monitoring. So I know somebody's talked about the aviation industry, and I missed that bit. I briefly worked in the automotive industry, and it was a factory of braking and airbag systems. So yeah, you could track your stock, but anything which went into an airbag or a braking system had a whole completely separate safety system which knew what components went into that braking system. So obviously when you see the recalls on and something, they could say, we know this sub-assembly was built in this factory, we know it's got a faulty component, and they could actually send it out because that data was always there. Obviously that's static for that unit in time, but essentially they identified what their safety system was, and that they had to keep track of where those components were placed, and they knew what to do if something went wrong with it, and they could tell you right away. They stored it, but you have to identify what your system is and store it. So you don't necessarily, they didn't have might have had one plan of an airbag unit that might highlight that piece, but that's it. But they knew where all their instances were, and they knew what the tolerances were of the important components were. And I think you need to decide what that is and have somewhere to store it. It'd be nice to have a model so it would just show people where to go, obviously, but you need to know which components are important for safety, what types you're using and what's applying to those. And that I think that's your first step. And then you can identify where your instances are.
Thank you, Chris. Jack, you had your hand up for a little bit.
Yeah, I did. Sorry. Yeah, I think I'll just out a couple of comments. One, I think someone was saying about mandatory things through operations, and I think it's perhaps there's a lot of mandatory things for operation that either don't happen or people find a way to tick a box, but the intention of it is missed. And I think I would like to think what we're doing here is beyond just kind of ticking boxes, to have the KPIs to make it look like we're doing something. I think a lot of, or certainly I find a bit of frustration, is a lot of what we're doing, and even talking about here, is about the handover from development into operations. And actually, for the majority of buildings that operations team will have are buildings that already exist, and as someone else pointed out, we will have a building come across and very quickly it will change and it's no longer what it was. So this focus on the development stage, I think, it kind of hampers our progress. And really what we want to do is understand how we want to work, and then we can go back and ask for certain information. But again, should we not be doing our duty just to go out and see what's been handed over, is that as built drawing as built? If we're going out doing those checks, should we not gather some of the information that is specific to us? You know, and then we can say, well, this information was incorrectly handed over. This was that, but it should be like that for anything, you know, any asset that's handed over to us, whether it's, you know, a new fire alarm system, a new fire door, a new building. You know, we should be in operations, that we know what we want and highlighting where we don't. But first, we need to know what we want, and a lot of the time, you know, all we do is say, "Oh, there's a problem. Can we have it?" Development teams, and we don't have that, but we never highlight and have it. We didn't know that we needed it. It's just when something goes wrong, we then ask for it, and then jump up and down a little that we don't have it, and blame someone else, in my view.
Thanks, Jack. Your reception's a little bit jumpy, so I missed a little bit of that, but I think absolutely we should focus, like if we could bring the focus maybe now onto that operations element. We've covered the handover thing. We know that that's sort of a place where things get lost or maybe inaccuracies come on, but maybe how is people in the industry managing their existing buildings? I know for us, we undertook measured surveys for all of our buildings. A long time ago, we undertook structural surveys for our buildings, and it's just how is everyone else doing that? How are they managing their data? How are they modeling that? And has anyone come across any really good or really bad stuff in the process? Oh, we've all got perfect buildings.
Well, yeah, assuming you can hear me.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
You're back on silent.
Well, yeah, so
Kieran.
we go out and laser scan our buildings, so effectively a measure servo really, and then is that Kieran speaking? Sorry.
I'm sorry, Jack, you're really really jumpy. Let's go on to Kieran.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Sorry, Jack, your reception is making it really difficult to hear you. I just wanted to pitch in here because the majority of what we do is sort of managing existing assets and existing portfolios. And the long and the short of it is we have to take on board additional costs to do extensive surveys of varying specifications, very bespoke to the client and to the building requirements. We put together data management plans and have long, extensive discussions about how we're going to manage the data ongoingly, what it's being used for, and how we're going to model that data. We put together example models, stuff that we've used previously, and find what fits for the client. We use various technologies to host them on the clouds, you know, have lots of different bodies. So we've got the operations teams on site that can view and use the data. We have ways ingrained into their training of how to update assets and which change forms to use and how to go through it. The point I'm trying to make is that it's not one answer. It's a long string of lots of different processes that all need to come together, that need to be discussed with all of the teams involved. So a lot of what we do is take on facilities management contracts from other facility manager providers. It's, you know, there's a lot of tenacity that goes between these groups sometimes, and it might be difficult to get information, quality data. Sometimes it's purposefully delayed. Looks like I'm having network difficulties too, sorry. But yeah, so it's about collaboration and having a clear plan at an early enough stage. And then a lot of expense goes into gathering the data and managing that data going forwards. There's no standard, as far as we can tell, to say you must have exactly all of these things in place. So it depends on what the client's needs are, how we can do it together.
Thanks for that, Kieran. Anybody else who wants to come in?
I couldn't agree more with that. It's lots of things, but I'm predominantly about delivery rather than the operations, and I think that it's all the investment by the clients of what you get. Let's say the end of handover is quite testament to the quality, and therefore can influence all those different things that Kieran's discussing.
Yeah, if you're involved in that sort of delivery side, Lucy, I mean, one of the things that we found is we in the past took on a lot of Section 106 properties, and I think there's now a lot less of an appetite for those sort of schemes, because you're even getting worse information from Section 106 ones than you are from when you've got full control of your own developments.
Yeah. I think someone put in the chat like BIM level 2 is a requirement. It is, but it can be satisfied in many different ways. And I'm talking like, just making sure, like, just having the detail provides assurance, isn't it? Not having that detail. Yeah, you don't know how all these components go together. Same for a refurb is even more of a nightmare, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's actually a huge thing for housing associations. We have existing buildings more than we're building. Especially the HRB side, and managing that information and having those EIRs ready and all of that good stuff is tricky, because we're in a position where we don't have it already, and so defining it to a contractor is tricky. And I guess that's the point of this whole group, is how do we manage that, maintaining that golden thread, maintaining that through the operation, and including refurbishment, because that's all about operations as well, isn't it? And I know that the BSR are asking for very detailed stuff about fire safety plans during building control applications, and all of that feeds into this, what's your fire strategy, where's that information held, is it consistent, can people use it productively, and that side of things. So sorry, I've gone on a bit. Anyone who wants to come in, please do.
I just wanted to say about the housing association. I used to work for a housing a long time ago, but to me, it always seems like you had the development side of things, and then you have the maintenance side of things, and there was always a very big gap there for housing associations, particularly from what I've seen. I feel like you need a data management team, somebody who's working that group of asset managers who are really sat there, who have got the responsibility of keeping the data, and they need to draw in all of the other teams, which you might have, for example, a capital projects team. You've got your reactive maintenance. You've maybe got somebody doing SFG 20 separately, but all of these people are tying into asset changes, updates that all need to come back to a central system. So I feel like you need to have that person or that team sitting in the center there that does pull all these threads together. And it's just, I've never seen it work practically where everybody's had to feed in separately. It's got to go through one funnel and get to that point, in my opinion. But I'm, obviously happy to hear what works for everybody else, or what everybody else has seen that works.
Yeah, interestingly, Kieran, we, as Alex well knows, a lot of our sort of compliance servicing inspections sits in a system, and we, could sort of pull, sort of text-based, spreadsheet-based CSV reports out of that. And then we actually involved our data management team and said, right, see what you can do with it. And they came up with were able to extract the data into a data warehouse, drop it into a Power BI report, which basically shocked everybody, because all of a sudden you could see how compliant each component was. How are we going on this? Oh, we're at 10%. Where they hadn't been inspected on time and things like that. Often that was because the contractors themselves weren't supplying the data. they were, quite, happy to supply the invoices, but trying to get the data out of them to prove that they were, inspected lifts or inspected smoke alarms, etc., and then being able to drop that into a system, pull it then out of that system into a meaningful visual report. It was, as I said, it was worth the effort of getting the data services team involved in that, because all of a sudden that visual impact of seeing, where they were on each different component for servicing hit home, and was, we could use that as leverage to push people to sort of conform more to this, the safety management system, conform more to processes, get contractors to, realise that they needed to up their game. So yeah, I completely agree with you on that. That there is the people that are managing contracts aren't necessarily, data gurus, and therefore you need someone with those sort of skills and strengths in order to bring a full picture to life of.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you make a good
Certainly.
point about. Sorry, Richard, go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, I was going to start. Should have done that. The places that I audit, now that I'm getting to a point of most places now I'm going back to for the second time, some places for a third, I'm realising this is the level of information that I'm wanting to see every year. Being picky about what it is that I want to see. I want to see everything, and I want to see your updated record drawing, etc. We've gone from first year round places being on my on the Richard scale, 60% compliant, where some things they've got every document you could ever want to see, other things they haven't. The places that have gone much better than that on second visit, and I'm sure on third visit will be somewhere up in the 90% on the compliances, is all of the places where there's an individual or a little team of 2 or 3 people that everyone is meant to get information to on a weekly, monthly, whatever it happens to be basis, and they do the tie-up between the CAFM system, the guys that are looking after drawings. Yeah, so someone is getting all of the pots of information and doing something useful with the whole lot. So places that I go into and visit one person to get all of my information tend to do much, much better than places where I walk through the door and they go, Fred's with you on Monday, Tracy's with you on Tuesday. Yeah, if it's 3 or 4 people that I need to see to get the information, generally speaking, it's because it's really siloed and people aren't talking to each other to know what the rest of the team do. One point of contact, and I actually get the information that I want to see. So yeah, but the one point of contact needs to be a system somewhere that if whoever it is that's looking after that system isn't in that week, that there's a second or third person that does. So there's always that little group. It's got to be something that a group can manage.
Yeah, and Dave made a good point about the visual impact of like using something like Power BI, and I think it's just worth mentioning that those kind of tools are really, really useful to buy in like the leadership of your company and to demonstrate to clients and even to maybe contractors, and to give that visual representation can really help people buy in and make a bit of an investment with it. And yeah, like you say, Richard, having the central point is paramount. And if you have to go here, there, and everywhere, it's because there isn't a correct system in place. So you're already failing, aren't you? You know, that's
so
yeah. So, and by far and away, the bit that makes my boards, because all of my reports just go to like our board meetings. When the board sits and reads through my report, it's the 3 little pie charts that I've got in there, and a bit that everyone takes. I've got, Rich, one of those pie charts had a big block of red in it. What does that mean? And so they've got doing stuff wrong. Yeah, and it's because it doesn't matter that there's 50 pages of report. 3 pie charts are the bit that people ask me questions about.
Yeah,
it just says 1,000 words. Yeah,
it's all in my report, but it's that little dashboard piece that does it for people. It's,
I talk about the board reports that I write, the power of red, because they will look through the entire board report and go, oh, what's this red bit? What does that mean? And then they'll concentrate on that bit. They won't read the rest of the report. Yeah,
That's right.
Just very mindful of time. We have 3 minutes left, and we've had a really, really good discussion here. And I think, you know, the key points that's come out is we do need that ownership. Safety management system, I think, really feeds into them. That's quite an important thing, especially as the regulator apparently will spend 20 hours looking at the safety management system for it. So I think that's a real big takeaway. And you know, it's all about the accuracy. You know, we've talked about a lot of the stuff before. What I'd really like before we go, so with our last 3 minutes, is any really good practice you've seen, anything that we can as a group take away and sort of from someone's learned experience use that going forward. Could be anything, small, huge.
I think Mark's bit was really interesting, actually. Information or having learned from a different industry,
Yes.
bringing it across.
I'm going to go one, Richard. I'm going to go for one final quick point of feedback from the regulator, what people aren't doing. And generally fire is pretty good. If we just think about structure, say we've got a 1960s concrete kind of building, concrete poor building that's degraded. And they say we're having a structural assessment done in 2 years' time, because as we know, structural engineers are really hard to come by. Fine, that's what you're saying. We've got a concrete pour, it's degraded, and we've got a structural assessment in 2 years' time. Okay, what's the so what? Why is the building still safe to live in now? We're in a pub together, Richard. You tell me why that building's safe. It's the so what, which most people are missing. It's not, I can't get it. Okay, you can't get it, I understand that. But what are your mitigations in the short term whilst you're waiting for it? And that is very, very, very common as well as the SMS. Keyboard out.
Thank you, Mark. I'm gonna cut it just because we're 1 minute left. I can see this going on for quite a while, because it's a huge topic. It's an absolutely huge topic. And it is the so what. Ultimately, we need to evidence to the regulator that our buildings are safe, and we need to be comfortable in that evidence. You know, if we're not comfortable with it, we're just ticking a box. It's not going to be good enough for them either. So anyway, thank you all for your time today. I think that we'll be sending the recording out and maybe a transcript of what we've spoken about as well. And yeah, if you've got any questions, reach out to me or Dave or Richard. I think he's still here, or George. And yeah, it's been good to see you all.
Great meeting. Thank you.
Cheers,
Thanks
guys.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.
Bye.